I used to frequently babysit for a family with 5 young children. The parents both worked long hours at a local hospital, so sometimes I'd be at their house for a total of 10 hours or more a couple days a week. Even though it was long hours and a lot of work, the kids were sweet and it was a fun way to make some extra money. I worked as a contract artist at the time, which meant I was self-employed and I didn't have a lot of savings. Babysitting helped me earn several $100s a week, so I valued my position. The family lived in a great big house out in the country, with no neighbors around for miles. They had lots of animals, including 2 dogs, chickens, and several cows that the children would care for. It was a beautiful property where the kids could grow up running free and exploring the outdoors. One particular day that I was babysitting, the parents of the children were going to be stuck at the hospital for longer than usual. Watching 5 young kids at one time was no easy task, and I already prepared breakfast and lunch that day, so the parents knew I was tired. Instead of having me make dinner, they decided to have pizza delivered to the house to make things easier. The mom ordered it and paid for it online, and then had it scheduled to come to the house around 6 p.m. Around the time the pizza was expected to come, some of the younger children were standing by the windows, anxiously awaiting the delivery guy. I was cleaning up the kitchen and feeding the baby when I heard several of the kids excitedly calling out that the pizza guy was pulling up the driveway. They were about to run outside, but I told them to wait until the man came to the front door. I looked out the window and saw a black car driving up the winding driveway. I glanced at the clock and noticed that they were right on time. The doorbell rang and I hurried over to open it. There was a middle-aged man standing there holding 4 pizza boxes. I greeted him and took the pizzas. I said thank you and was about to close the door when he told me that there was a new policy with delivery that if the total was over a certain amount, the delivery driver was required to get a signature when they dropped off the pizzas. He said it had to do with the pizzas getting delivered to the wrong houses and customers getting angry when they paid but didn't receive the order. I hadn't heard of this policy before, but I agreed to do so. The man didn't have a pen and I didn't have one either, so I was going to have to go to the office to look for one. It was raining outside and I felt bad that the man was getting wet, so I invited him into the foyer to wait a moment while I retrieved a pen. I handed the oldest child the pizzas and told him to take the pizzas into the kitchen while I got a pen from the office, which was just off the foyer. As I was digging through drawers looking for something to write with, I called out to the foyer to apologize to the pizza guy for taking so long. I explained that I was just the babysitter and didn't know where the parents kept certain things within the house. Finally, I found a pen and made my way back to the foyer. I stepped out of the office and was shocked to find the foyer empty. I was confused and wondering where the man could have gone. My first thought was to make sure that the kids were okay. I raced to the kitchen and saw all of them sitting around the table quietly eating. Not wanting to scare them, I didn't ask them where the pizza guy went. I then thought maybe the guy lost his patience because I had taken so long to find a pen. Maybe he just left without my signature. I walked to the front door and looked outside and saw that his car was still there, but there was no sign of the man. I closed the door so the kids couldn't hear me and began calling out into the yard, "Sir? Sir, where did you go?" There was no response. I gave up and went back inside. At this point, I was starting to panic. There was a stranger hiding somewhere in the house and I had 5 kids' lives I was responsible for. I decided to check the downstairs bathroom, thinking maybe he used it without asking. It was not necessarily a crazy thought that he had just helped himself, but he wasn't there. Finally, I had to do what I was dreading, which was check upstairs. I had no idea if this guy was crazy or dangerous. All I knew was that I had to find him right away and get him out of the house before he did anything to the children. Once I got upstairs, I began checking the bedrooms, but each one was empty. I was about to turn to go back downstairs when all of a sudden a hand was clamped over my mouth and someone had grabbed my arm, holding it tightly. I turned my head quickly and saw it was the pizza guy, who had a terrifying look on his face. He pulled me roughly into the master bedroom, closed the door behind us, and sat me on the couch. The pressure of his hand on my mouth let up just enough for me to let out one loud scream. He immediately put his hand back on my mouth and pulled a knife from his pocket with the other hand. He said if I made any noise again, he was going to use it on me. He then told me I was going to round up all the valuables in the room and give them to him without making a sound. If I did as I was told, no one would get hurt. But if I didn't, he said the kids would be in danger. He asked if I understood what I was supposed to do, and I nodded my head. He released his hand from my mouth and allowed me to stand up. Because I couldn't speak, I wasn't able to tell him that I was just the babysitter and didn't know where the parents of the house kept their valuables. My heart was pounding. I made my way to the dresser and began going through the drawers. My panic increased as I saw that there were just clothes inside, nothing that looked to be much of value. "Hurry up," the man said harshly. I looked over at the vanity and was relieved to see a jewelry box sitting on top. I opened it and found several lavish-looking diamond necklaces and earrings. I handed them to the man, but he still wasn't satisfied. "I know you've got more in this room than that," he said. I walked to the dresser and opened the door, praying that there would be something inside that would appease the man enough to leave me alone. But before I could look, the bedroom door was suddenly kicked down and the room was filled with screams of police officers instructing the man to put his hands in the air. I was in complete shock, as I hadn't had a chance to call the police. The man tried to run but was captured instantly and put into handcuffs. He was escorted out of the house and into a patrol car. As it turned out, the oldest child had heard my scream and called 911, while keeping the other kids calm. As for the pizza delivery guy, investigators claimed he was having a manic episode and that he was booked into a mental hospital. I'll forever be grateful for the oldest child's quick thinking, which likely saved not only my life, but every one of the kids. When I was in high school, I was working several jobs to try to save up to pay for college. Even though I spent nearly every free moment I had working, I was struggling to make much money. In my town, most places that paid well would only give jobs to people who were 18 and up, and I was only 17. One of my friends suggested that I try to get a nannying gig and that she made several $100s a week just from watching some children after school and on an occasional weekend. That sounded better than making $7 an hour in a hot kitchen serving hamburgers like I had been doing, so I decided to try it out. When I got home from school that day, I went online and pulled up the community Facebook page for my town. I recalled seeing posts from 3 pretty frequently by people asking for a babysitter, so I figured this was probably a good place to start. I made a post saying that I was open for a nannying job, was CPR certified, and had my own transportation. I finished off the post by saying what days and times I was available for and mentioned that I had experience babysitting neighborhood children in the past. Within an hour, I got several responses from people who were interested. One particular family caught my attention. They were located within 10 minutes from my house, which meant I would barely have to use any gas. Plus, they were offering to pay $20 an hour to watch only one child. This was far more than any other families were offering, so I immediately reached out to them and told them I was interested. Part of me was curious about why they were willing to pay so much money for only the one child to be babysat, but I just assumed they were on the wealthier side or particularly desperate for childcare. I reached out to the mother of the family through direct message and told her that I would be interested in watching her child. I mentioned that if she would prefer, I could hang out with the child with her present just to see if I was a good match for what she was looking for. She thanked me for offering but told me there was no need and that she felt confident due to my past experience that I would be able to do a good job. She gave me her phone number and asked if I could come over in the afternoon of the upcoming Saturday. She explained that her husband worked long hours throughout the week, which meant that they had very little time together as a couple. They were hoping that through hiring a babysitter, they would have more time to spend quality time together and work on their marriage. Coming from a family with 2 parents who worked constantly to keep food on the table, I completely understood their situation and was excited about the fact that I would be able to help them out, even in this small way. I agreed that I would come on Saturday and would watch their child. The mother thanked me and explained that it would just be their little boy Charlie, who had just turned 6 years old. She said that he would be very little trouble and the most I would have to do was prepare dinner for him and ensure that he got all of his homework done before bed. When Saturday rolled around, I plugged the family's address into my GPS and then followed it to their house. It was located in a well-kept, middle-class neighborhood. The family's home appeared completely normal, with a white picket fence and carefully trimmed hedges. I rang the doorbell and the mother answered, a big smile on her face. She greeted me warmly and welcomed me inside. Her husband also said hello and was very friendly. The mother called Charlie to come downstairs and meet me. He was a small boy with black hair and glasses that made his already large eyes appear even bigger. He gave me a polite greeting before looking away. He was quiet, but I thought nothing much of it since many children are shy when first meeting someone. The mother gave me some brief instructions before waving goodbye and telling me that they planned to be home around 9 p.m. and that Charlie's bedtime was 8:30 p.m. When they left, I asked Charlie if he had finished his homework for Monday yet, and he shook his head no. I told him that I would help him finish it quickly and then he could play the rest of the evening. He sat at the kitchen table and pulled several books out of his backpack. The first one he opened was a math book. I was shocked to see that the level of math he was working on was way beyond what a typical 6-year-old child would be working on. It was closer to high school level content. I realized that he must be in an advanced program and have special gifts. I asked him if he needed any help, but he only shook his head and breezed through the work faster than I ever could. About 30 minutes went by and he told me he was finished. I checked his assignments and sure enough, he had completed everything on the list in that short period of time. I was both stunned and pretty impressed. He asked me if he could watch television and I told him that was fine. I went into the kitchen to get dinner started, leaving him alone in the living room for several minutes. After I had put a frozen pizza in the oven, I went back to the living room to check on Charlie. I had been expecting for him to be watching a cartoon or some sort of children's show, but that wasn't what was playing. Charlie was seated in the front of the television, intently watching a crime documentary about a woman who had been brutally killed by her boyfriend. I gasped and snatched up the remote to turn the show off as fast as I could. Charlie instantly became enraged and yelled, "Hey, I was watching that!" I told him that that show was not appropriate for someone his age and encouraged him to go outside and play until dinner was ready. He did as I said, but slammed the door on his way out. I sighed and headed back to the kitchen. This was going to be harder than I anticipated, it seemed. When the pizza was done, I took it out of the oven and put it on a plate for Charlie's dinner. I then headed out into the yard to tell him it was time to eat. I found him near a bush, crouched down in the yard. I walked quietly so I could see what he was doing before he knew I was there. I glanced over his shoulder and was shocked to see that he had captured a wild baby bunny. He was squeezing it with one hand and had a jagged rock in the other that he was holding up in the air. "Hey!" I screamed, causing him to jump. "Let that thing go!" I said, yanking the rock away. Charlie released the bunny, which instantly hopped away out of sight. "What were you going to do to that bunny?" I asked him. Charlie looked at me with a terrifyingly straight face. "I was going to bash his head in," he told me. I was too shocked to know how to respond, so I simply told him to come inside because it was time for dinner. As we walked back to the house together, I told myself this would be the last time I'd ever babysit for Charlie. He was giving me majorly creepy vibes, and I was starting to think that there was something wrong with him. I didn't care how much his parents were offering to pay me, it wasn't enough. When we got back inside, Charlie sat down at the table and I placed a plate with pizza on it in front of him. "I don't like this kind," he said in an angry tone. I knew this was about to be a problem. "Well, I'm sorry, but that's what your mom told me to give you for dinner," I said in a calm voice. Before I could even register what was happening, Charlie picked up the plate and hurled it at the wall, causing it to shatter. He then ran out of the room and stomped upstairs. I could feel myself starting to cry, so I didn't go after him or say anything. I just grabbed a trash bag and began picking up the mess. I kept telling myself that his parents would be back soon and I just needed to last a couple more hours. I was wiping pizza sauce off the walls when all of a sudden I heard a creak in the floorboards coming from behind me. I spun around just in time to see Charlie charging me with a long silver kitchen knife. I screamed and put my arms out to protect myself. The knife plunged into my left shoulder. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins so quickly I couldn't even feel the pain at first. I grabbed my cell phone off the floor and ran to the nearby bathroom, shutting and locking the door behind me. I was bleeding everywhere and looking around desperately for something to wrap around my wound. I pulled a hand towel off the hook and used that to slow down the bleeding. I then picked up my phone and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, I breathlessly gave her the address of the house and explained what happened. I could feel myself becoming lightheaded and just hoped the paramedics arrived in time. I kept growing weaker until I eventually fell unconscious. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hotel room, my parents at my side. They told me that the paramedics had gotten me to the hospital just in time, and although I had lost a lot of blood, I was going to be all right. As for Charlie, his parents were forced to check him into a corrective facility for children. I fear the day that he gets out. My parents were always very protective of me, as I was their only child. I always had a babysitter growing up if they had to go anywhere. I was around 10 years old when this particular incident occurred. It was a Friday night and my parents wanted to go out together and spend some time with their friends. The teenage girl that would normally babysit me was sick with the flu, so my parents were in a pinch to find someone else quickly. One of our neighbors had a son who was home from college, and my parents decided to offer him $100 just to watch me for the evening. While they knew the neighbors very well, they weren't very familiar with their son, whose name was Michael. Still, they trusted the family well enough to have Michael babysit me that evening. Michael couldn't say no to the $100, so he agreed to come over and watch me for a few hours until my parents got home. My parents got me a Happy Meal from McDonald's before they left, so Michael wouldn't even have to make me dinner. All he had to do was sit on the couch for a few hours and make sure nothing happened to me. When Michael arrived, my parents thanked him for coming before hurrying out the door. Michael made me feel uncomfortable almost immediately. He had long, shaggy hair that hung in his eyes and wore all black. But it wasn't his appearance that creeped me out. It was the way he looked at me. He stared at me for a long time without breaking eye contact. Finally, he cleared his throat and asked me what I would like to do. I shrugged and said that we could just watch television. I sat down on the sofa and turned on the Food Network. At the time, there was a baking competition that I enjoyed watching. Michael sat down next to me on the other end of the couch. After about 30 minutes had gone by, I was aware that he had been edging closer and closer to me on the couch. Then, before I could process what was happening, he wrapped his arm around my shoulder and began stroking my left thigh. I was 10. But I definitely wasn't stupid, and I knew immediately that I was in serious danger. I told him to stop and tried to get up, but he pulled me back down. I was shaking and terrified of what was about to happen next. He put his hand over my mouth to keep me from screaming, and I did the only thing I could think of at the moment. I bit down on his hand as hard as I could. He jumped back, screaming and cussing. I took this opportunity to run to my next-door neighbor's house. She was a sweet elderly woman that I trusted. Luckily, she was home and answered the door quickly, taking me inside. I explained what happened and she called my parents and the police immediately. Michael was later arrested. It's safe to say that I never had another babysitter again after that. I can't imagine what Michael would have done to me if I had not escaped that night. Sleep tight.